Imagine the summer of 1969. The world is tense, glued to television sets, awaiting the final chapter of the space race. But the grainy black and white images we see aren't of Neil Armstrong descending the ladder. They're of an anonymous Soviet cosmonaut, his face obscured by shadow and visor, planting the colossal hammer and sickle flag into the gray lunar dust. What if that moment of one giant leap for mankind was instead viewed in the West as a decisive, crushing defeat? What if the Soviet Union had achieved the ultimate technological prize of the Cold War? This was the world that President Kennedy desperately sought to prevent, and the consequences of its realization would have rewritten the political, scientific, and cultural future of the entire planet. This is History Reimagined. Welcome, and feel free to add your comments anytime. We all know that the history of the moon race hinged on one massive Soviet failure, the N-1 rocket. This colossal heavy-lift vehicle, designed to rival the American Saturn V, was plagued by engineering flaws and suffered catastrophic explosions on all four of its test launches. In our alternate history, the crucial factor changes. Let's imagine that the brilliant but frequently undermined chief designer, Sergei Korolev, survives his untimely death in 1966. With his leadership intact, he secures the necessary resources and political backing to iron out the N-1's engine cluster and guidance issues. So, by late 1968, the massive rocket is deemed reliable. This successful N-1 launches the Soviet manned mission, Project LK, in early 1969, beating the Apollo 11 mission by a crucial 6 months. Therefore, the Soviet Union achieves the impossible first, not just landing a man, but successfully returning him to Earth, claiming the moon for the communist bloc. To understand the whole story, let's go back to the state of the race in 1969. By the late 1960s, the US was clearly ahead in the meticulous steps needed for a lunar landing, having mastered lunar orbit rendezvous with Apollo 8 and 10. Yet, the Soviets held the most important historical leads: Sputnik, the first satellite, and Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. These psychological victories had always made the West feel like it was playing catch-up. The US program was driven by a single, expensive, and non-negotiable goal set by President Kennedy, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. The race wasn't about science, it was about ideological supremacy. On the other side, the Soviet program, while staffed by geniuses, was fundamentally crippled by two things: secrecy and bureaucracy. Resources were often diverted, and rival design bureaus fought for influence. NASA, by contrast, had a singular focus, an open budget, by government standards, and the world's most advanced industrial base fully committed to the goal. In our timeline, the Soviet system's flaws caused the N-1 to fail. In this new history, the system is forced by Korolev's success to commit to flawless execution. The result is an unparalleled propaganda moment that proves to the world that a centrally planned communist economy could indeed outperform Western capitalism. So, what's the world was going to look like? The US loses its primary Cold War goal, leading to a profound morale crisis. The Soviet achievement is an unparalleled propaganda coup broadcast globally, cementing the narrative that communism is the superior technological and ideological system. The headline isn't, "We did it," it's, "They won." President Nixon, who inherited the space program, faces a massive political backlash. The US public and Congress feel humiliated and betrayed. Nixon's authority is immediately undermined, and his political focus shifts radically away from expensive, showy science towards immediate military and political terrestrial gains. Particularly those in Africa and Asia, would view the Soviet victory as proof that the Soviet model is the path to modernity and power. The USSR gains immense global leverage, and the funding of communist-aligned movements, like those in Vietnam and across South America, receives a massive boost as the world begins to bet on the winning side of the Cold War. What about the future of the space race? With the goal of beating the Soviets lost, American commitment to space funding evaporates almost overnight. Congress may slashes the funding for NASA, and remaining Apollo missions, 18, 19, and 20, are in question. funding for the development of the space shuttle is heavily delayed or entirely scrapped. It may resulted that the U.S. retreats into low Earth orbit, focusing primarily on military satellite projects. The USSR, energized by its victory, is emboldened. They dedicate resources not just to the Moon, but to Mars. The Soviet lunar base, the planned Zvezda project, becomes a priority, established within a decade. The primary focus shifts from a race to a long-term Soviet occupation and militarization of deep space. The Moon becomes a Soviet territory, used for astronomical observation, resource surveying, and, potentially, military communication. In our timeline, the Apollo program drove a massive technological expansion, leading to hundreds of technological spin-offs that fueled the digital age: microchips, advanced composite materials, medical sensor technology, and more. In the alternate timeline, this moonshot spirit of ambition and massive scientific investment in the West dies off. The need for radical solutions that led to the development of the modern computer chip is lessened, causing innovation to slow. The sense of American scientific supremacy is shattered, leading to a brain drain as some Western engineers look east. In this world, Soviet culture heavily features the triumphant cosmonaut hero. Lunar-themed communist propaganda becomes widespread, influencing cinema, literature, and art for decades. Conversely, the lack of an inspiring U.S. moon mission affects generations of Western scientists and engineers, potentially dampening interest in hard sciences across the free world. So, the Soviet first landing wouldn't have just been a moment of history, it would have been a tectonic shift in the Cold War. It would have accelerated Soviet geopolitical power, killed America's space program, and altered the pace of Western technological development. The 20th century, already tense, would have become a time of deeper ideological certainty for the communist world and a sustained period of doubt and technological catch-up for the West. The ultimate question is, what would be the long-term cost of this single loss? Would the USSR have collapsed more slowly or even survived if it had a successful, permanent space program to prop up its image? Would we have a permanent Russian presence on the Moon today, and how would that affect modern space treaties and resource management? How would the lack of NASA's technology spin-offs have affected the development of personal computing, the internet, and the pace of the digital revolution we experienced? Thanks for watching the video. This is History Reimagined. Join our discussion, and don't forget to subscribe.